Welcome back to Xbox Corner, my name's Luke, and in today's review we're taking a look at a game called Gungrave G.O.R.E, or G.O.R.E. Not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it or what G.O.R.E stands for, but this one is the third game in a series which has come to have somewhat of a cult following, so much so that it's stemmed its very own anime series. Now, I've neither seen or played any of the previous entries, so I went into this one blind, and from the screenshots I was pretty much expecting some kind of action-heavy Devil May Cry type game, but did I find it? Well, drop a like and subscribe if you enjoy our content, and let's find out. So, like I said, having no knowledge of the previous titles, I wasn't up to scratch with any of the storyline thus far, and I was expecting a bit of a recap. But in the intro to the game I was briefly informed about something called Seed, which after further reading turned out to be some kind of alien drug, was introduced to the game's main characters, those being Grave, the cool looking Dante fella, Quartz, the game's narrator and your personal guide, and Mika, your boss. As part of the LL Canal, a group of mercenaries aiming to eradicate Seed, the game sees you on a mission to destroy a Seed refinery, which just so happens to be in the centre of Scumland, a secluded island populated by a drug cartel known as the Raven Gang, and we're finally introduced to its four powerful bosses before the game begins. Now, despite getting some in-game cutscenes and a paragraph or so of text on the stage select menu, I didn't really feel as though I was given much in terms of a storyline or the lore in general, and this was the first hint that the game was really aiming to cater to fans of the series who have prior knowledge and don't need bringing up to speed on things. As I played through the game, Quartz chimed in every now and then with little tidbits of information, but that was about as deep as it got, and in fact it wasn't until the 8th mission that you actually meet any of the mentioned cast. Before that it's just you making your way to the refinery, so I have to admit by the 6th or 7th mission I'd almost switched off to it entirely. Now, I later discovered that on the main menu there was actually a history option, which does give you a bit of a recap on the storyline and keys you into how Grave wound up working with the LL Canal, but this is pretty lengthy and it's delivered through still images and completely unvoiced text, and there are a ton of different names thrown about which I did find a little difficult to follow. So as with the story, I'm not savvy to how the gameplay was in previous titles, but Gungrave G.O.R.E introduces you to the game's core combat mechanics over the course of 1.5 levels, which, while I can appreciate does a decent job of explaining things, is a little excessive in my opinion and could have been summarised with just an opening battle. If you're familiar with the fast-paced combo-driven combat style of Devil May Cry, where you're rewarded for chaining moves together and mixing it up with both gunplay and melee attacks, then Gungrave does share a few similarities. However, due to him lugging around a ridiculously huge coffin on his back, Grave moves slowly and has next to no manoeuvrability, so the most you can do is perform a dodge roll, which is akin to fat rolling in the Soulsborne games. The movement is just something you have to get used to though, and it wouldn't be so bad, but there are times especially in the boss battles when it's practically impossible to avoid attacks, and you just have to rely on the tiny iframes window provided by your dodge roll. Now, the combat itself has a reasonable amount of depth to it. Grave is armed with Cerberus, dual pistols which fire a quartet of bullets with each pull of the trigger, never need to be reloaded and can fire a powerful charge shot. The Death Hook, a kind of hook shot which can be used to get over here enemies like Scorpion and use them as meat shields or meaty weapons. And finally the Coffin, which aside from being used to launch special attacks, also doubles as his melee weapon and can be used to deflect missiles. And alongside your health bar you have a shield which absorbs a set amount of damage before breaking and is recharged automatically when not taking damage. All of these things can be upgraded between levels using DNA obtained from completing them. You can increase your damage and health and obtain new combo moves and special attacks. But the upgrades are expensive and you can usually only afford one, so the developers are kind of expecting you to repeatedly play levels in order to unlock them all. Now, rather than having to manually aim your weapons, Grave will automatically lock onto enemies close to your reticle, which is both a boon and a bane at times, especially when you're trying to prioritise targets, though you can manually zone in and switch between them by holding down the left bumper, and I found this method of aiming felt pretty passive. It pretty much takes any kind of skill away from the player, but it does become a necessity to deal with the sheer amount of enemies that the game throws at you. And when it comes to melee combat, it's as simple as tapping the B button to swing your coffin, which again requires no skill. There are some additional moves you can do, like firing on the spot a few times to activate an auto-fire mode, or building your combo counter known as the beat meter before unleashing a volley of shots around you as Grave dances about like Christian Bale in Equilibrium. But the problem with these moves are that you aren't able to move whilst performing them, and later on you'll constantly be hit with rockets and bombs which knock you back, breaking them. Now, your final attacks come in the form of special moves called demolition shots, and as you kill enemies you'll build a meter, eventually earning you a demolition point which can be spent to launch powerful ultimate skills from your coffin, and which also heal you a little. These skills can get you out of sticky situations, but feel incredibly underpowered, and even on normal mode, most enemies are able to survive a single shot. So the developers have attempted to build quite a complex combat system for players to use, but unfortunately the results are utterly underwhelming. The auto-aiming becomes monotonous, and after the first couple of stages I felt like I was starting to get vibration white finger from all the trigger pulling, so I had to turn off the controller vibration in the options. The melee combat is underpowered despite you smashing a gigantic metal coffin into enemies' faces, and of the special moves that I tested, none of them felt particularly effective. The biggest issue I have with the game though is definitely the levels and enemies, and I felt like these only accentuated the underwhelming combat. While there is a decent amount of variety to levels when it comes to the visuals, they're basically all the same in terms of the gameplay. Work your way through them following the big yellow arrows. Every corner you turn around you'll be assaulted by swarms of foot soldiers which you need to obliterate, and every so often you'll get into a boss battle which involves chipping away at his health whilst trying to avoid its attacks. Due to your limited manoeuvrability though, there's no real way to avoid attacks, so it's usually just a case of soaking up gunfire and destroying the enemies before they destroy you. And to make matters worse, most of the levels feature tight corridors or lock you into areas giving you nowhere to run, which often leads to you being surrounded, followed shortly by death. There's even one level set on a train where all you do is walk forward the entire time. But in general, once you've played the first level, you've pretty much played them all. Now when it comes to the enemies, there is a reasonable amount of variety to them, but due to the sheer numbers that are thrown at you, they all just end up blending together, and after a while, every encounter starts to feel the same. One of the most frustrating aspects of it is that it's really difficult to actually prioritise certain enemies. You'll have some shield guy running at you who you need to fire a charged shot at or hit with a melee attack, but then rocket or grenade guys keep knocking you back, and when you try to target them you'll have chainsaw guys hacking at you or shotgun guys blasting you in the face. It's total carnage, and don't get me wrong, I love games with hectic gameplay. The Serious Sam games are some of my favourite first person shooters, but at least they have a little order and structure to them, whereas here it feels like the developers have just spawned in as many random enemies as possible as often as they could. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that when it comes down to it, for me, Gungrave G.O.R.E was just mindless violence and not of the good kind. After the first 4 levels it had become monotonous, and 8 levels deep I'd almost lost the will to go on. There'll no doubt be some hardcore fans trying to defend it, and I'll admit it's probably an acquired taste, but it's a taste which makes me want to rinse my mouth out with bleach, or at least a stiff shot of whiskey to calm my aching finger. So visually the game doesn't look too bad on the Switch, there's a good amount of detail to the environments, and the performance holds up well on the Series X, even with all the action going on. In general the game is pretty stylish, there are some nice visual effects, especially from the special attacks and Grave doing his whole equilibrium thing, and if you like explosions you'll be in heaven with this one. The character models look decent, but the majority of the enemies are generic foot soldiers and you'll face countless numbers of them, so they quickly become forgettable. And I would say that the best aspect of the visuals are the cutscenes, especially the intro one, which is probably one of the coolest cutscenes I've ever seen. Overall though, not bad, but nothing special on the visual front. So audio wise the game sounds good so far as most of the sound effects go, the gunfire is pretty punchy, though your constant pistol fire and a million enemies blasting the shit out of you does just become a cacophony of noise. The voice acting is pretty decent for the most part, but Quartz repeatedly telling you that there's more enemies incoming or that you're surrounded does start to wear a little thin after the 50th time, and when it comes to the music I'd say it definitely fits the gameplay. It's high tempo, hectic as hell and packed with heavy metal guitar licks, thumping drums and a bit of screamo for good measure. Not my cup of tea, but definitely appropriate. So going into the game, I really wanted to like it. Like I said, I was expecting some kind of Devil May Cry type game, but instead I just got a mediocre third-person shooter, which feels like it would have really stood out about 10 years ago. But perhaps this was the intent of the developers all along. Bring back the series that the fans know and love and add a few new features to spice things up a bit. Personally, I found it monotonous, repetitive and, on the whole, pretty frustrating. The combat system had a lot of potential but was oversimplified and felt hindered due to the sheer number of enemies the game threw at you. Levels, while having the odd set piece, were linear slogs, and the storyline was pretty much an afterthought. So when it comes to a rating from me, unfortunately Gungrave G.O.R.E is scoring 4 out of 10. But hey, if you enjoyed the originals, you'll probably enjoy this one. With that said though, have you played any of the previous titles? Are you a long-time fan of the series? And will you be picking this one up? Let me know down in the comments section below. As always, if this review helped you out, give us a thumbs up, and if you're looking for more Xbox reviews, deals, graphical comparisons and Game Pass content, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. But for now, thanks once again for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Thanks everyone, take care.